Adrian Blackthorne left his bride alone on their wedding night and rode straight to another woman's bed. He expected silence. He expected compliance. What he got instead was an anonymous essay that detonated across London's elite like a powder keg, exposing every dirty secret of aristocratic marriage, written by someone who knew the game intimately. As whispers filled gentlemen's clubs, and his mistress vanished without explanation, the Duke realized too late. The most dangerous opponent he'd ever face wasn't a rival lord or a political enemy. She was sitting across from him at breakfast, calm as winter glass, watching him with eyes that had been calculating since the moment he abandoned her. If you want to see how far a scorned woman's intellect can burn down an empire built on arrogance, stay until the end. Drop a like and comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning after his wedding, Adrian Blackthorne woke in silk sheets that didn't belong to his wife. Sunlight cut through the velvet curtains of Catherine Langley's townhouse in narrow, accusatory slants. He lay there a moment, one arm thrown over his eyes, listening to her breathe beside him. Soft, familiar, uncomplicated. Exactly what he needed. "You're thinking too loudly," Catherine murmured without opening her eyes. Her fingers traced lazy patterns across his chest. "It's unbecoming for a newly married man." Adrian huffed something that might have been a laugh. "Married men think constantly. It's the condition of the institution." "Then you're doing it wrong." She rolled toward him, dark hair spilling across the pillow. "Marriage is supposed to free a man from thinking. You have a wife to manage the household, produce heirs, and smile at tedious dinners. Everything else remains as it was." "Does it? Doesn't it?" He didn't answer. Couldn't, really. Because Catherine was right, at least according to every social contract he'd ever witnessed. Marriage among their class wasn't about disruption. It was about consolidation. His father had married for land, his grandfather for political alliance. Adrian had married for both, with the added benefit of Alara Whitwin's impeccable bloodline and considerable dowry. Love had nothing to do with it. Love was for poets and paupers. "I should return," he said finally, sitting up, "before the staff starts gossiping." Catherine's laugh was low and knowing. "Darling, they're already gossiping. You arrived at midnight smelling of champagne and left your bride in that mausoleum you call a house. Every servant in Mayfair knows by now." "Then an hour more won't matter." But he dressed anyway, because even indifference required certain performances. He kissed Catherine's hand with the practiced charm of a man who'd been doing this for years, promised to call on her within the week, and stepped into a London morning that was gray and damp, in the way only November could manage. The ride back to Blackthorne House took 20 minutes through streets slowly waking to the rhythms of commerce and soot. He nodded to a few acquaintances, tipped his hat to Lady Morland, who looked appropriately scandalized, and tried not to think about what waited for him at home. Or rather, who? Alara, his wife of less than 24 hours. He'd barely spoken to her at the wedding, a few pleasantries during the ceremony, a single dance at the reception, and then he'd left her standing in the foyer of his ancestral estate while he rode off to the one woman who actually understood him. It had seemed at the time like the reasonable thing to do. Now, steering his horse through the iron gates of Blackthorne House, Adrian felt the faintest whisper of something uncomfortable. Not guilt. He'd done nothing wrong by the standards of their world, but perhaps imbalance. He dismounted, handed the reins to a groom who wouldn't meet his eyes, and walked into the cavernous silence of his home. The place was immaculate, as always. Marble floors gleamed, chandeliers sparkled even in weak daylight. Portraits of dead blackthorns glared down from the walls with expressions of stern disappointment, as if they knew exactly what kind of man he'd become. "Your Grace!" The butler appeared from nowhere, as butlers do, his face a masterpiece of neutral professionalism. "Pemberton." Adrian stripped off his gloves. "Is the Duchess awake?" "Her Grace took breakfast in the morning room an hour ago. She is currently in the library." Adrian paused. "The library?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Reading?" "I believe so, Your Grace." Of course she was. Alara Whitwin, now Alara Blackthorne, had arrived at their wedding with more books than dresses in her trousseau. He'd found it vaguely charming in an eccentric sort of way. The kind of quirk aristocratic women were permitted as long as they didn't make too much noise about it. "Very well, I'll be in my study. See that I'm not disturbed." "Of course, Your Grace." Adrian climbed the stairs to the east wing, where his private office overlooked the gardens and the city beyond. He had correspondence to review, estate matters to sign off on, investments to consider. The machinery of wealth didn't pause for weddings or wedding nights. He worked steadily through the morning, approving payments and drafting letters, until just past noon when Pemberton knocked softly. "Luncheon is served, Your Grace? The Duchess is in the dining room." Right, meals, another performance required by the institution of marriage. Adrian found Alara sitting at the far end of a table built to seat 30. She wore a dove-gray dress with minimal ornamentation, her blonde hair pinned in a style that was elegant but not extravagant. A book sat closed beside her plate. She looked up when he entered, and for a brief, unsettling moment, Adrian had the distinct impression he was being catalogued. "Good afternoon," he said, taking his seat at the opposite end. "Good afternoon, Your Grace." Her voice was calm, steady, utterly unremarkable. Servants appeared with soup, bread, cold meats. The clink of silver on porcelain filled the silence like a metronome counting down to something neither of them wanted to name. "I trust you slept well," Adrian offered, because someone had to say something. "Quite well, thank you." "And you're finding the house to your liking?" "It's very grand. It's been in my family for 6 generations." "I can see that." Another silence. Adrian buttered a piece of bread with more attention than it deserved. "I apologize for my absence last night," he said finally. "There were matters requiring my attention." Alara sipped her wine. "Of course. I hope you weren't too uncomfortable." "Not at all. Mrs. Pemberton showed me to my chambers. They're lovely." "Your chambers? Not our chambers." Because of course they had separate rooms. Every aristocratic marriage did. Privacy, they called it. Dignity. "I'm glad," Adrian said, though he wasn't sure what he was glad about. Alara set down her glass and looked at him directly for the first time since he'd entered. Her eyes were blue. He'd known that, of course, had noticed during their courtship, but he hadn't noticed how clear they were, how focused. "May I ask you something, Your Grace?" "Adrian, we're married. You should call me Adrian." "Very well. May I ask you something, Adrian?" "Of course. Do you intend for this marriage to be a partnership or simply a contract?" The question landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Adrian set down his fork carefully. "I'm not sure I understand the distinction. A contract is transactional. I provide heirs and social respectability. You provide title and financial security. We maintain separate lives within the framework of legal obligation." She paused. "A partnership is something else." "And what would that something else entail?" "Mutual interest, conversation, perhaps even friendship." Adrian studied her, really looked at her for the first time since their engagement. Alara Whitwin had been described to him as beautiful, accomplished, well-bred, and suitably educated. All true. But no one had mentioned the sharpness in her gaze or the precision in her words. "I think," he said slowly, "that we should aim for civility, respect, a well-managed household." "I see. Does that disappoint you?" "Should it?" The conversation was a fencing match, each response a careful parry. "Most women in your position would expect certain considerations," Adrian said. "Most women in my position have been trained since birth not to expect anything at all." There was no bitterness in her tone, just observation, statement of fact. Adrian found himself unexpectedly curious. "And you weren't?" "I was, but I also learned to read." "Reading is hardly revolutionary." "No, but thinking is." Before Adrian could respond, Pemberton appeared in the doorway. "Your Grace, Lord Hastings is here to see you. He says it's urgent." Adrian stood, grateful for the interruption. "Show him to my study. Excuse me," he added to Alara. She inclined her head. "Of course." As he left the dining room, Adrian caught a glimpse of her in the mirror above the sideboard. She'd reopened her book and was reading as calmly as if they'd been discussing the weather. Something about that bothered him, though he couldn't say why. Lord Hastings was pacing Adrian's study like a caged animal when he arrived. "Thank God you're here," Hastings said, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I'm ruined, absolutely ruined." Adrian closed the door. "Sit down and tell me what happened." "It's Catherine." Adrian went very still. "What about her?" "She's gone. Vanished. Left London in the middle of the night without a word to anyone. That's impossible. I'm telling you, she's gone. I went by her house this morning. The whole place is shut up. Servants dismissed, furniture covered. It's like she never existed. Adrian sank into his chair, mind racing. Catherine wouldn't just leave. They'd spoken yesterday. She'd been perfectly normal, amused even. Did she leave a note? He asked. Nothing. That's what makes it so bizarre. Hastings leaned forward. Adrian, there are rumors about you, about your wedding night. What kind of rumors? The usual sort. That you went to her instead of your bride. That half of London knows. That your new wife must be humiliated beyond. My wife is fine, Adrian cut in sharply. We have an understanding. Do you? Because there's talk at the club. Men saying you've made a spectacle of yourself. Women whispering about the poor Duchess. And now Catherine disappears the morning after? It looks terrible. Adrian stood and walked to the window. Below, the garden stretched in manicured perfection. Somewhere in that vast house, Alara was reading, thinking, not crying, not making a scene, just thinking. Catherine can do as she pleases, Adrian said. If she's chosen to leave town, that's her affair. But why now? Why so suddenly? I don't know, Hastings. Perhaps she had family business. Perhaps she grew tired of London. Or perhaps someone convinced her to leave. Adrian turned. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying it's a remarkable coincidence. You marry. You spend your wedding night with Catherine. And by morning, she's fled the city like a thief in the night. Hastings stood. People will connect those dots, Adrian. They're already starting to. After Hastings left, Adrian sat alone in his study for a long time. The strange thing about power, he'd learned, was that it made you careless. When you'd been invincible your whole life, you stopped checking for cracks in the armor. But something had cracked. He could feel it. Catherine leaving made no sense unless someone had given her a reason to go. But who and why? His mind circled back, inevitably, to the woman at the other end of his dining table. Alara, his wife, the stranger he'd legally bound himself to for life. What had she said? Most women have been trained not to expect anything at all, but I also learned to read. And thinking is revolutionary. Adrian pulled out a piece of paper and began drafting a letter to his solicitor. He wanted information, background on Alara Whitwin beyond the sanitized reports from her family, education, interests, acquaintances, anything that might explain the uncomfortable feeling growing in his chest, the feeling that he'd miscalculated. But that evening, dinner was served in the same cavernous dining room, same distance between them, same polite silence. But when dessert arrived, Alara spoke. I attended a lecture today. Adrian looked up. A lecture? On political economy. At the Royal Society. They allow women in the gallery now, if they're quiet. I see. And was it interesting? Very. The speaker argued that marriage laws disproportionately benefit men while providing women no legal recourse for abandonment, cruelty, or financial mismanagement. Adrian set down his wine glass slowly. I imagine, Alara continued, her tone still perfectly pleasant, that most men in attendance found the argument threatening. But I thought it was rather logical. Did you? Yes, though I suspect logic and law don't always align. They rarely do. A pity, don't you think? She smiled, a small, enigmatic curve of her lips, and returned her attention to her dessert. Adrian watched her, something cold sliding down his spine. That night, he didn't go to Catherine's. Couldn't, obviously, since she'd vanished. Instead, he lay awake in his enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, and wondered what exactly he'd married. 3 days later, a pamphlet began circulating through London's elite circles. It was unsigned, published by a small press in Bloomsbury, and titled simply, On the Economics of Matrimony. Adrian acquired a copy from his club, where men stood in tight clusters, reading passages aloud with expressions ranging from amusement to outrage. He took it to a quiet corner and read. The essay was surgical, precise. It dissected aristocratic marriage as a financial transaction in which women were sold like livestock, their autonomy traded for security, their intellect dismissed as decorative. It named no names but described scenarios so specific that anyone in their social sphere would recognize the patterns. The section on wedding nights was particularly cutting. A gentleman may abandon his bride mere hours after vows are exchanged, seeking comfort in the arms of a mistress, and society will call this normalcy. The bride, meanwhile, is expected to accept her irrelevance with grace, her value measured solely in her ability to produce heirs and maintain appearances. This is not marriage. This is ownership. And ownership, history teaches us, always ends in revolution. Adrian read the passage 3 times. Then he looked up and saw Lord Pembroke watching him with a knowing smirk. "It's rather close to home, doesn't it, Blackthorn?" Adrian folded the pamphlet carefully. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Come now. Everyone knows you spent your wedding night at Catherine Langley's, and now this appears, written by someone who clearly has intimate knowledge of how our world works." Pembroke leaned in. "Makes you wonder who's holding the pen." Adrian left the club early. When he arrived home, Alara was in the drawing room embroidering, the picture of domestic tranquility. "Good evening," she said without looking up. Adrian held up the pamphlet. "Have you read this?" "What is it?" "An essay. On marriage. It's causing quite a stir." "How interesting. Is it well written?" "Extremely." "Then I shall have to find a copy." She set down her embroidery and finally looked at him. Her expression was open, curious, utterly innocent, and Adrian knew, with absolute certainty, that she was lying. Not about reading it, about writing it. The realization hit him like a punch to the chest. His wife, his quiet, bookish, supposedly docile wife, had just fired the opening shot in a war he hadn't even known they were fighting. "Alara," he said carefully, "did you have anything to do with Catherine leaving London? I've never met the woman. How could I?" "That's not an answer." "Isn't it?" She stood, smoothing her skirts. "If you'll excuse me, I'm tired. I think I'll retire early." She walked past him, close enough that he could smell lavender and ink. At the door, she paused. "Adrian?" "Yes?" "That essay you mentioned. If it's truly well written, then perhaps the author is simply telling the truth. And if the truth causes a stir..." She smiled. "Well, maybe the problem isn't the essay." Then she was gone. Adrian stood alone in the drawing room, the pamphlet crumpling in his fist. Somewhere in London, in clubs and salons and drawing rooms, his peers were reading words that exposed them, mocked them, challenged the very foundations of their power, and the woman who'd written them was sleeping down the hall. His wife, his enemy, the most dangerous person he'd ever met. He'd wanted a marriage of convenience. What he'd gotten was a revolution, and she'd started it on their wedding night, while he was too arrogant to even notice. The following week, Adrian did something he rarely allowed himself. He panicked, not visibly. A man of his position couldn't afford visible panic, but internally, every instinct screamed that the ground beneath him was shifting. The essay had spread like fever, not just among the aristocracy, but into merchant classes, literary circles, even radical political groups. Newspapers were debating it. Women were quoting it in letters. Someone had read portions aloud at a suffrage meeting, to thunderous applause. And every conversation Adrian overheard seemed designed to remind him of his own failures. Whoever wrote it must have experienced such treatment firsthand. Perhaps she's married to one of us. Poor woman, whoever she is. He threw himself into work, estate business, investments, parliamentary committees. Anything to avoid being home, where Alara continued her routine of reading, embroidering, and attending lectures with the serene focus of someone who had absolutely nothing to hide, which meant, of course, that she had everything to hide. Adrian hired a private investigator to track the pamphlet's origins. The man returned 3 days later with nothing useful. The publisher refused to name the author, citing editorial privilege, and the handwriting on the manuscript had been disguised. "Whoever it is," the investigator said, "they're careful, professional, almost." Adrian paid him and sent him away. That evening, he found Alara in the library, surrounded by books. She was making notes in a leather journal, her handwriting small and precise. "What are you working on?" he asked from the doorway. She didn't startle. "Research." "For what?" "A personal project." "May I ask what kind of project?" "You may ask." She didn't look up, didn't stop writing. Adrian crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite her. "Alara, we need to talk." We're talking now. About the essay. Are you still reading it? Half of London is still reading it. Then it must be quite good. It's inflammatory. Or honest. Adrian leaned forward. Did you write it? Finally, she looked up. Her eyes were calm, clear, utterly unreadable. Why would you think that? Because it appeared immediately after our wedding. Because it describes situations you've experienced. Because you're one of the few women I know with the education and intellect to produce something that sophisticated. You flatter me. I'm accusing you. Are you? She closed her journal. And if I did write it, Adrian, what then? Would you forbid me from writing, confiscate my papers, lock me in my chambers until I learn proper wifely submission? Of course not. Then why does it matter? Because... He stopped. Because why? What exactly was he afraid of? That she'd made him look foolish? She had. That she'd exposed the hypocrisy of their world? She had. That she'd done it all while smiling at him across the breakfast table? Absolutely. Because it's dangerous, he said finally. For whom? For you. If people discover you wrote it, they won't. I'm far too careful for that. The admission hung between them like smoke. Adrian sat back, something between admiration and fury rising in his chest. So you did write it. I didn't say that. You just admitted, I said I'm careful. That's not the same as admission. She stood, gathering her books. But hypothetically, if I were the author, I'd say this. The essay isn't about you, Adrian. It's about a system. You just happen to be an excellent example of how that system functions. I treated you with respect. You left me alone on our wedding night to sleep with another woman. The words were quiet, factual, devastating. Adrian had no response. I'm not angry, Ilara continued. Anger would imply expectations. I had none. You married me for my dowry and bloodline. I married you for security and position. That was the contract. But contracts can be renegotiated. What do you want? She looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, genuinely this time with something almost like pity. I want you to wonder, she said. I want you to lose sleep. I want you to question every assumption you've ever had about power and marriage and women who are too quiet. She moved toward the door. And when you're finished wondering, perhaps we'll have a real conversation. She left him there, surrounded by books and the ruins of his certainty. Adrian sat in the dark library until long past midnight, turning over every interaction they'd had since the wedding. The calm demeanor, careful words, the strategic attendance at lectures, Catherine's disappearance, the essay's timing, all of it orchestrated, all of it planned. He'd married a woman who fought wars with words instead of tears, and she'd been winning since the moment he abandoned her. The worst part? Some small traitorous part of him was impressed. By the end of the month, 2 more essays had appeared under the same anonymous signature, A.W. The initials meant nothing to the public. To Adrian, they were a declaration of war. Annette Whitwin, Ilara's middle name. She was taunting him. The second essay tackled inheritance laws. The third, women's education. Both were brilliant, infuriating, and absolutely impossible to refute. London society was in chaos. Conservative lords called for censorship. Progressive thinkers celebrated the mystery author as a hero. Women's rights groups tried to recruit A.W. to their cause. And through it all, Ilara Blackthorne attended dinners, poured tea, and played the role of dutiful duchess with such perfection that no one suspected her of harboring a single radical thought, except Adrian. He watched her now at a dinner party hosted by the Duke of Somerset, holding court with a group of wives and widows. She laughed at appropriate moments, complimented hostesses, discussed fashion and gardens with apparent interest. But when the conversation turned to A.W.'s essays, her expression shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. I think it's wonderful, Lady Somerset was saying. Someone finally saying what we've all thought but been too afraid to voice. It's dangerous, another woman countered. What if our husbands read these things and think we agree? Perhaps they should know we agree. Easy to say when it's anonymous. The woman who wrote this would be ruined if her identity came out. Ilara sipped her wine. Perhaps she doesn't care about ruin. Perhaps she's decided that truth matters more than reputation. The women fell silent, considering this. Adrian, watching from across the room, felt something shift. She wasn't just fighting him, she was building an army. That night, when they returned home, Adrian followed Alara to the library. "We can't continue like this," he said. She set down her reticule. "Like what?" "This war, whatever this is." "I'm not at war with you, Adrian." "Aren't you?" "No, I'm simply living my life, writing, thinking, existing as something more than decorative furniture." She turned to face him. "If that feels like warfare to you, perhaps you should examine why. You're trying to destroy me. I'm trying to free myself. That your collateral damage says more about the system than about my intentions." Adrian crossed the room, stopping just short of her. They were close enough that he could see the flecks of gray in her blue eyes, close enough to smell the lavender she wore. "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly. "I want you to see me." "I see you." "No? You see a wife, a duchess, a problem to be managed." She didn't back away. "I want you to see Alara, the person, the mind, the woman who's been invisible to you since the day we met. That's not fair." "Isn't it? Tell me one thing about me, Adrian. One real thing, not what's in the marriage contract or what your solicitor reported. Something true." He opened his mouth, closed it. He couldn't. Alara's smile was sad. "That's what I thought." She moved past him toward the door. "You're brilliant," Adrian said suddenly. She stopped. "You're brilliant and terrifying, and you've outmaneuvered every man in London without them even realizing they're playing your game. You've built something extraordinary out of anger and intelligence, and He exhaled. "I don't know whether to admire you or fear you." Alara turned slowly. "Both," she said softly. "You should do both." They stood there, two people bound by law and separated by everything else, and for the first time since their wedding, something like understanding passed between them. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't love, but it was real. And sometimes, Adrian thought, reality was more valuable than either. "What happens now?" he asked. Alara considered this. "Now? Now we decide what kind of marriage we're going to have. One where you pretend I don't exist and I burn down your world one essay at a time. Or one where we're honest with each other, where we fight fair, where we build something neither of us expected. And if I choose wrong, then the next essay will be about you specifically, with names." She wasn't joking. Adrian laughed despite himself, a short, startled sound. "You're ruthless. I'm efficient. There's a difference." She left him there, and Adrian sank into a chair, exhausted. His marriage had become a negotiation, his home, a battlefield, his wife, an opponent who fought with precision instead of passion. And somehow, despite everything, he felt more alive than he had in years. The game had changed, and for the first time in his life, Adrian Blackthorne wasn't sure he was winning, but he was absolutely certain he wanted to keep playing. The decision came to him at 3 a.m, staring at the canopy of his bed while rain hammered the windows. Adrian was going to call her bluff. Not with anger, not with threats, but with the one thing Alara hadn't anticipated: cooperation. If she wanted honesty, he'd give her honesty. If she wanted to be seen, he'd look. And if she thought she could outmaneuver him in a game of intellect and strategy, then he'd prove that two could play better than one. The idea terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. By dawn, he'd dressed and gone to the library, where he knew she'd be. Alara had a routine now. He'd noticed because he'd started paying attention. She woke early, took tea in the morning room, then disappeared into the library for 2 hours before breakfast. She was at the desk when he entered, surrounded by papers and books, her hair still loose down her back. She looked up, startled for the first time since he'd known her. "You're awake," she said. "I am." He pulled a chair close, not across from her, but beside her, near enough to see what she was writing. "What are you working on?" Her hand moved subtly, covering the page. "Why do you want to know?" "Because you're my wife, and I've decided to stop pretending that doesn't mean something." Alara studied him with those clear, calculating eyes. "What changed?" "I did. Last night. You were right. I've been treating you like furniture, like an obligation." He gestured at the papers. "So show me. What is it?" "You won't like it." "Probably not." Show me anyway. She hesitated, then slid the manuscript toward him. The title read, On the Legal Fiction of Coverture. Adrian scanned the first page. It was even more incendiary than the others. A systematic dismantling of the legal principle that a married woman's identity was subsumed by her husband's, that she had no right to property, earnings, or even her own children. This will make powerful enemies, he said quietly. I know. You could be prosecuted, sued for libel, socially destroyed. I know that too. And you're going to publish it anyway. Yes. Adrian set down the pages and looked at her, really looked. The defiance in her posture, the slight tremor in her hands that she was trying to hide. She was afraid. Of course she was afraid. But she was doing it anyway. That, he realized, was actual courage. Not the battlefield kind he'd been raised to value. The quieter, more dangerous kind that happened in libraries and drawing rooms, where women fought wars with no armor and no recognition. Then I'll help you, he said. Alara blinked. What? I'll help you. You need distribution, yes? Contacts in publishing? Protection from legal consequences? He leaned back. I have all of that. Use it. Why would you do that? This undermines everything I what? Benefit from? Of course it does. That's why it needs to be said. He paused. I've spent my entire life accepting a system because it served me. But you're right, it's rotten. And if you're brave enough to say so, the least I can do is make sure you're heard. She was staring at him like he'd grown a second head. This is a trap, she said finally. It's not. You're trying to control the narrative, to manage. Alara. He caught her hand, carefully, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. I'm trying to be your partner, the way you asked me to be. I'm probably going to be terrible at it. I'll make mistakes. I'll revert to being an arrogant bastard because that's what I've been trained to be. But I'm trying. Her fingers were cold in his, small. He'd never noticed how small her hands were. What do you want in return? She asked. The same thing you want. To be seen. To be challenged. To have one person in my life who doesn't just agree with everything I say because of my title. He smiled, though it felt uncertain. I want a real marriage, Alara, not the performance we've been staging. Real marriages require trust. Then let's start building it. She pulled her hand back slowly, but her expression had shifted. The armor was still there, but a crack had appeared. If you betray me, she said softly, I'll destroy you. Not with essays, with everything I have. Fair enough. I mean it, Adrian. I've been underestimated my entire life. I won't be again. I believe you. They sat in silence for a moment, the manuscript between them like a treaty. All right, Alara said finally. We'll try this, your way, but I have conditions. Name them. No more Catherine, no more mistresses. If we're building something real, then it's exclusive. Adrian had expected this, had already decided truthfully the night Catherine disappeared. Agreed. Second, I continue writing. Under my pseudonym or my real name, that's my choice, but you don't interfere. Agreed. Third, we argue, properly. When you disagree with me, you say so. None of this passive acceptance followed by resentment. If this partnership is real, then you get a voice too. That surprised him. You want me to argue with you? I want you to be honest, even when it's uncomfortable. All right, then here's my first honesty. You're going to get hurt if you publish this under your real name. Society will ostracize you. You'll be uninvited from events, cut from social circles, possibly worse. I know. And you're willing to accept that? Are you? She tilted her head. Because if I use my real name, I'm not Alara Whitwin anymore. I'm the Duchess of Blackthorn, which means your reputation is tied to mine. Adrian hadn't considered that, but he considered it now. What it would mean to stand beside her publicly, to defend her arguments in parliament and clubs, to make enemies of men who'd been allies. The old Adrian would have refused, would have protected his position above all else. But the old Adrian had been bored, empty, going through motions in a life that felt increasingly meaningless. Use your real name, he said. We'll handle the consequences together. Alara's eyes widened. Then, for the first time since their wedding, she smiled at him. Not the polite Duchess smile she wore in public. A real one. It transformed her face. All right, Your Grace, she said. Let's see if you can keep up. The challenge in her voice made him laugh. I'll do my best. She gathered the manuscript, stacking pages with crisp efficiency. We'll need to move quickly. I want this published within 2 weeks before anyone can organize opposition. 2 weeks? Do you have contacts at the major publishers or not? I do, but then we start today. She stood, already moving toward the door. I'll prepare the final draft. You make the introductions. We'll meet for lunch to coordinate strategy. Adrian watched her go, feeling like he'd just agreed to something far more complicated than he'd intended. But beneath the uncertainty was something else. Something that felt dangerously close to excitement. His wife had just drafted him into a revolution, and he'd volunteered. By noon, Adrian had sent messages to 3 publishers he knew through business connections. By evening, 2 had responded with cautious interest. By the following morning, 1, a progressive-minded printer named Thomas Ashford, had agreed to a meeting. They met in Ashford's cluttered office in Bloomsbury, where books and manuscripts teetered in precarious stacks, and the air smelled of ink and coffee. Your Grace, Ashford said, looking between Adrian and Alara with obvious confusion. I confess, when you requested this meeting, I expected a different sort of business. Adrian gestured to Alara. My wife is the author I mentioned. She writes under the name A.W. Ashford's eyes went wide. The A.W.? The marriage essays? The same, Alara said calmly. And I have another piece ready for publication. This one addresses coverture law. She slid the manuscript across the desk. Ashford picked it up like it might explode. Your Grace, Duchess, you understand what this will mean? The backlash? I do. You'll be attacked, publicly, viciously. I'm counting on it. Controversy sells copies, doesn't it? A slow smile spread across Ashford's face. It does indeed. Then you'll publish? Under one condition. You do a reading. Public. At the Bloomsbury Literary Society. Let people see who A.W. really is. Alara glanced at Adrian. He gave a small nod. Agreed, she said. They shook hands, and as they left Ashford's office, Adrian felt the ground shifting again. Not beneath him this time, beneath both of them. Are you certain about this? He asked as their carriage rattled through crowded streets. Once you're public, there's no going back. I've never been more certain of anything. They'll come for you, people I know, people we dine with. Let them come. Her jaw was set, her gaze fixed on something beyond the carriage window. She looked like a soldier heading into battle. Adrian reached across and took her hand. She started, then looked down at their joined fingers. Whatever happens, he said, I'm with you. You don't have to be. I know. I'm choosing to be. There's a difference. Alara's throat worked. For a moment he thought she might cry, but she just squeezed his hand once, hard, and turned back to the window. Neither of them let go until they reached home. The reading was scheduled for the following Thursday. 7 days to prepare. 7 days for London society to speculate, gossip, and sharpen their knives. Adrian spent those days doing something he'd never done before, preparing to be publicly wrong. He consulted with progressive members of Parliament, attended suffrage meetings incognito, read everything Alara had written with genuine attention. And the more he learned, the angrier he became, not at her, but at himself. How had he never seen it? The systematic legal oppression, the casual cruelty disguised as tradition. The way women like Alara were trained from birth to be intelligent enough to manage estates, but never acknowledged for that intelligence. He'd benefited from it all without question. The realization sat in his stomach like lead. You're brooding, Alara said one evening. They were in his study. Their study now, really. She'd moved her desk beside his, and they worked in companionable silence most nights. I'm thinking. About? How many women I've dismissed over the years. How many brilliant minds I ignored because they were attached to the wrong gender. Alara set down her pen. You're not responsible for the whole system. Aren't I? I upheld it, enforced it, benefited from it. Yes, and now you're changing. That matters. Does it? Does changing now erase decades of... Adrian, she moved to his chair, perching on the arm. You can't undo the past, but you can choose the future. That's what we're doing, both of us. He looked up at her. In the lamplight, her hair gleamed gold, her eyes impossibly clear. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly. "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." The corner of her mouth quirked, and he found himself smiling back. "Come on," she said, pulling him to his feet. "We've been working for hours. Let's do something frivolous." Frivolous? Yes, shocking, I know, but even revolutionaries need breaks. She led him to the music room, where a pianoforte sat dusty and unused. Alara sat at the bench and began to play, something bright and complicated that filled the empty room with sound. Adrian leaned against the wall and watched her, this woman he'd married for convenience and found himself genuinely admiring. Her fingers moved across the keys with the same precision she brought to everything else, but there was joy in it too. Lightness. She was beautiful, he realized. Not in the decorative way society valued, but in the way fire was beautiful, dangerous and necessary, and impossible to ignore. When she finished, he applauded. "I didn't know you played," he said. "You never asked." "What else don't I know about you?" She considered this. "I hate oysters. I read 3 books a week. I think most poetry is pretentious. I wanted to be a barrister when I was 12, before I understood that was impossible." She stood. "I speak fluent French and passable Italian. I'm terrified of horses. And I've been in love exactly once, with a boy who died of scarlet fever when I was 16. Adrian absorbed this. "I'm sorry. About the boy." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." Still, they stood in the dim room, music still echoing faintly. "What about you?" Alara asked. "What don't I know?" "I'm a terrible card player. I wanted to be an explorer when I was young. I think most aristocrats are fools, including myself most of the time." He paused. "And I've never been in love. Not once, not even close. Not even with Catherine. Especially not with Catherine. She was convenient, familiar, safe. And now? Now I don't want safe." The words hung between them, heavier than he'd intended. Alara stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gray in her eyes, the slight flutter of pulse at her throat. "This is dangerous, Adrian. What we're doing, building something real." "I know. We could both get hurt." "I know that too." She reached up, cupping his face with one hand. Her palm was warm against his cheek. "Then let's be dangerous together," she whispered. He kissed her. Not the perfunctory kiss at their wedding, but a real kiss, deep and searching and absolutely nothing like convenience. She made a small sound against his mouth, her fingers tangling in his hair, and Adrian felt something in his chest crack open. Something he'd kept locked for so long he'd forgotten it was there. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alara looked dazed. "Oh," she said. "Oh?" "That was—" "Yes." She laughed shakily. "We should have done that weeks ago. We had to get here first." "True." She stepped back, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. "Adrian, I'm not expecting anything," he said quickly. "We agreed to honesty, not—" "Shut up." She pulled him down and kissed him again. Later, much later, they sat on the floor of the music room, backs against the wall, shoulders touching. "The reading is in 3 days," Alara said quietly. "I know. Everything changes after that. I know. Are you frightened?" Adrian considered lying, decided against it. "Terrified." "Me too." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her. Outside, London slept. Inside, 2 people who'd been strangers built something fragile and fierce in the darkness, and tried very hard not to think about what would happen when the light came. The night before the reading, Lord Hastings arrived at Blackthorn House in a state of agitation that Adrian had never witnessed in their 20-year friendship. "Are you insane?" Hastings demanded, barging past Pemberton into the study. "Completely, utterly mad?" Adrian looked up from his correspondence. "Good evening to you, too." "Don't good evening me. Is it true? Your wife is AW, and you're supporting this public spectacle tomorrow?" "It's true." "Adrian." Hastings collapsed into a chair. "Do you understand what you're throwing away? Your reputation, your position, my complicity in a corrupt system? Yes. I'm throwing that away quite deliberately. This isn't a joke." "I never said it was." Hastings stared at him like he'd grown horns. "What happened to you?" A month ago, you were the most pragmatic man I knew. Now you're, what, acting on principle? Choosing integrity over convenience? You sound like a radical. Maybe I am one now. Because of her. Hastings said it like an accusation. That woman has poisoned you. Adrian stood slowly, every inch the Duke. That woman is my wife, and she's done more for my character in 6 weeks than you've done in 2 decades. So I'd suggest you choose your next words very carefully. Hastings held up his hands. I'm trying to protect you. From what, the truth? From social suicide. Adrian, if you stand beside her tomorrow, you'll be ostracized. The club will expel you. Parliament will... Parliament can go to hell. The words came out harder than he'd intended. Hastings flinched. You've changed, Hastings said quietly. Yes, I have. For the better. I don't recognize you anymore. Good. I didn't like who I was before. Hastings stood, adjusting his coat with sharp, angry movements. When this falls apart, and it will, don't expect me to pick up the pieces. I won't. At the door, Hastings turned. She's using you. Don't you see that? This is all strategy to her, a game. If it is, then I'm playing too, and I'm done pretending games don't have consequences. After Hastings left, Adrian sat alone in the dark study, hands shaking. He just burned a friendship, the first of many bridges he'd torch tomorrow. But when he climbed the stairs to Alara's chambers, they'd been alternating rooms all week, unable to stay apart. He found her awake, reading by lamplight. Hastings? She asked. How did you... I heard shouting. She set down her book. What did he say? That you're using me. That this is social suicide. That I've changed beyond recognition. And what did you say? Adrian sat on the edge of her bed. That he's right, about all of it. Alara went very still. Adrian, I have changed. This is social suicide, and maybe you are using me. He took her hand. But I don't care. Because for the first time in my life, I'm doing something that matters more than status or comfort or the good opinion of people I don't even respect. You'll lose friends. I'll make new ones. You'll be mocked. I've been mocked for lesser things. Your family will disown you. My family's been dead for years. I barely knew them. She was gripping his hand so hard it hurt. Why are you doing this? Because you asked me to see you, and once I did, I couldn't look away. Alara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. This is reckless. I know. You could still back out tomorrow, claim I acted without your knowledge. I could, but you won't. No. She pulled him down into a kiss that tasted like desperation and hope. I'm falling in love with you, she whispered against his mouth, and that terrifies me more than anything we're doing tomorrow. Adrian's heart stopped, then restarted at twice the speed. Good, he said roughly, because I'm already there. And I'm terrified too. They held each other in the lamplight, 2 people on the edge of a precipice, and tried not to think about the fall. The Bloomsbury Literary Society was packed, every seat filled, people standing against the walls, late arrivals crowding the doorway. Adrian recognized faces from Parliament, from his club, from dinner parties, and political gatherings. Half of London's elite had turned out, some to support, most to witness a spectacle. Alara stood backstage, pale but composed. She wore a deep blue dress, simple and elegant, her hair pinned severely back. You don't have to do this, Adrian said for the 10th time. Yes, I do. Alara, she turned to him, cupping his face with both hands. Whatever happens out there, promise me you won't try to rescue me. This is my fight. Let me fight it. I can't just stand by and... Yes, you can. That's what partnership means, trusting me to handle this. He caught her hands, pressed kisses to both palms. You're extraordinary. You know that? Tell me again after the riot. There won't be a riot. Have you met our friends? Despite everything, he laughed. Thomas Ashford appeared, looking flushed and excited. They're ready for you, Your Grace. Alara took a deep breath, released it. Became someone else. Not the Duchess, not the wife, but the writer. The voice London had been debating for weeks. Let's give them something to talk about, she said. She walked onto the stage alone. The room erupted, half applause, half gasps of shock. Adrian watched from the wings, hands clenched, as Alara stood at the podium and waited for silence. It took a long time. Finally, when the noise had died to a murmur, she spoke. "My name is Alara Blackthorn. You know me as A.W. I am the Duchess of Blackthorn, daughter of Lord and Lady Whitwin, wife of Duke Adrian Blackthorn, and I am the author of the essays on marriage, inheritance, and legal coverture that have circulated through this city for the past month." The murmur became a roar, people shouting, arguing, some standing to leave. Alara raised her voice. "I understand that my identity shocks you, a woman of my position, speaking publicly on such matters. But that is precisely the point. If even I, with wealth, title, and education, lack basic legal rights, what hope is there for women without my privileges?" "Shame!" someone shouted from the back. "Yes," Alara agreed. "Shame indeed. Shame on a system that treats half its population as property. Shame on laws that give husbands complete control over their wives' bodies, earnings, and children. Shame on all of us for accepting this as natural, rather than seeing it for what it is, systematic oppression." Adrian watched her command the room, not with charm or beauty, but with pure intellectual force. She dismantled arguments before they were raised, anticipated objections, met hostility with facts delivered like hammer blows. She was magnificent. And the room was turning. Not entirely, some walked out in disgust, but others leaned forward listening, taking notes, nodding at points they'd never considered, women especially. Adrian saw wives and daughters and widows watching Alara like she was something they'd been waiting for their entire lives. When she finished, the applause was deafening, but so was the opposition. Lord Pembroke stood in the third row, red-faced with fury. "This is an outrage, a mockery of everything. Everything that keeps men like you in power?" Alara cut in smoothly. "Yes, that's rather the point." The crowd laughed, some nervously, others with genuine delight. Pembroke turned to Adrian in the wings. "Blackthorn, control your wife!" Adrian stepped onto the stage. The room went silent. He crossed to Alara, took her hand, and faced the audience together. "My wife," Adrian said clearly, "needs no controlling. She is the most intelligent person I've ever met. And if her words make you uncomfortable, Lord Pembroke, perhaps you should examine why rather than demanding her silence." The place exploded. Shouting, arguments, people standing, gesturing wildly, some cheering, others cursing. Adrian and Alara stood at the center of the chaos, hands joined, and watched their old world burn. Later, much later, they returned home to find half their staff gone. A dozen calling cards from outraged friends stacked on the hall table. A formal notice of expulsion from Adrian's Gentlemen's Club. Alara read the notice, then set it on fire in the drawing room fireplace. "Well," she said, watching it burn, "we're thoroughly ruined." Adrian pulled her close, completely. "No regrets?" "None. You?" She looked up at him, eyes bright. "Not a single one." They kissed in the firelight, surrounded by the ashes of their old lives, and began building something new. They kissed in the firelight, surrounded by the ashes of their old lives, and began building something new. Or they tried to. The morning after the reading, Adrian woke to find a letter shoved under his study door. No seal, no signature, just 5 words scrawled in angry capitals. "You will pay for this." He showed it to Alara over breakfast. She barely glanced at it. "That's the 4th one I've received. Mine are more creative. Yesterday's promised eternal damnation and social leprosy." "This isn't a joke." "I know it's not. But what would you have me do? Cower? Apologize? Write a retraction?" She buttered her toast with deliberate calm. "They want fear. I won't give it to them." Adrian crumpled the letter. "Someone broke into our house to deliver this. Or bribed a servant. We're down to half staff, remember? Loyalty is expensive when your employers are pariahs." She was right, of course, but that didn't stop the cold knot of worry in his gut. The following days confirmed his fears weren't unfounded. Dinner invitations dried up completely. The few friends who'd remained neutral suddenly discovered pressing business elsewhere when Adrian called. His solicitor sent a terse note requesting they postpone all meetings indefinitely. Professional distance, he called it. Cowardice, Adrian knew. Even shopping became an ordeal. Alara returned from a trip to Bond Street pale and shaking, though she tried to hide it. What happened? Adrian demanded. Nothing. A minor incident. Alara, she sighed. Lady Pembroke was there with her daughters. They saw me and started whispering, loud enough that everyone could hear, called me a whore, a traitor to my sex, said I'd corrupted you. That vicious... And then they turned their backs. All of them. The entire shop full of women just turned away, like I'd ceased to exist. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled around her teacup. Adrian crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against him. I knew it would be hard, she whispered into his chest. I knew they'd attack, but I didn't expect how much it would hurt, how lonely it would be. You're not alone, aren't I? You're here, yes. But everyone else? Gone. My mother won't return my letters. My sister sent back the book I lent her with a note saying our family name has been disgraced enough. Her voice cracked. I've lost everything, Adrian. Everyone. Not everyone. You have me. For how long? Until the novelty wears off? Until supporting me costs you too much? The question hit him like a slap. You think I'd abandon you? I think people do what's convenient, and eventually I'll stop being worth the inconvenience. Adrian pulled back, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. I'm not going anywhere, not because it's convenient, but because I choose you every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. You say that now. I mean it. He cupped her face. We're in this together, you and me against the whole damn world if necessary. Alara searched his face for a long moment. Then she kissed him, fierce and desperate, and pulled him toward the stairs. They made love in the middle of the day, in her sunlit bedroom, with an urgency that felt like defiance, like proof they were still alive despite everything trying to crush them. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets, Alara traced patterns on his chest. I'm pregnant, she said quietly. Adrian went completely still. What? I'm fairly certain. 2 months now. Maybe 3. The timing aligns with... She stopped. With when we started actually being married. He sat up, heart pounding. Are you sure? As sure as I can be without a doctor, but I can't exactly see one without word spreading, can I? We'll find someone discreet, someone trustworthy. And if I am pregnant, what then? She looked at him. A child makes everything more complicated, more dangerous. Or it gives us more reason to fight. It also gives them more leverage. They'll say I trapped you, that I got pregnant deliberately to secure my position. Let them say whatever they want. We'll know the truth. Alara laughed bitterly. The truth hasn't helped us so far. It's still worth fighting for. She rolled toward him, pressing her forehead against his shoulder. I'm scared, Adrian. Really scared. Not of what they'll do to me, but what they'll do to our child. Growing up as the son or daughter of pariahs, ostracized before they're even born. Adrian wrapped his arms around her. Then we make sure we win. We don't just survive this. We change the system so thoroughly that by the time our child is old enough to understand, the world is different. That's impossible. So is everything we've already done. She was quiet for a long time, then, do you really think we can win? I think we don't have a choice but to try. 3 days later, the counterattack began in earnest. Adrian received a summons to appear before a parliamentary committee investigating seditious publications. The charge was vague enough to be dangerous. They weren't accusing him of anything specific, just creating a framework to destroy him legally if he didn't comply. It's a trap, Alara said, reading the summons over his shoulder. They want you to either denounce me publicly or face legal consequences. I know. So don't go. I have to. If I refuse, they'll issue a warrant, drag me there in chains if necessary. Better to face them on my terms. There are no good terms with these people. Then I'll create some. The hearing was held in a wood-paneled room that smelled of old books and older money. 5 committee members sat behind an elevated desk, looking down at Adrian like judges at an execution. Lord Pembroke led the questioning. Of course he did. Duke Blackthorne, thank you for attending. Did I have a choice? We all have choices. That's what we're here to discuss. Pembroke shuffled papers with theatrical precision. Your wife has published multiple essays attacking the fundamental institutions of British society, marriage, property law, the natural order of relations between men and women. She's published essays advocating for legal reform. There's a difference. Is there? Because it seems to us that the Duchess is encouraging rebellion, unrest among women of all classes. Some might call that sedition. Some might be idiots. The room went silent. One committee member actually gasped. Pembroke's face turned purple. You would do well to remember where you are, Your Grace. I remember perfectly. I'm in a room full of men terrified that their wives might start thinking for themselves. This is outrageous. What's outrageous is hauling me here to answer for my wife's opinions. She's not my property. Her thoughts aren't mine to control or apologize for. If you have issues with her writing, take it up with her. We can't exactly summon a lady to Parliament. Why not? Afraid she'll make better arguments than you? Pembroke slammed his hand on the desk. Your Grace, if you cannot control your wife, perhaps we should consider whether you're fit to hold your position, your seat in Parliament, your various appointments and responsibilities. There it was, the real threat. Adrian leaned back in his chair, making a show of considering this. Let me see if I understand. You're threatening to strip me of political power unless I publicly denounce my wife and force her to stop writing? We're suggesting that a man who cannot manage his own household cannot be trusted to help govern a nation. Interesting logic. Tell me, Lord Pembroke, does your wife know about the mistress you keep in Cheapside? The one you've had for 6 years? Pembroke went white. How dare! Or you, Lord Hastings? Adrian turned to where his former friend sat, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Does Lady Hastings know the gambling debts you've hidden from her? The ones you've been paying off with her dowry without her knowledge? That's privileged information, is it? Because it seems to me that if we're discussing household management, we should examine all the hypocrisy in this room, starting with the fact that not one of you practices what you preach about marital propriety. The committee members were sputtering, trying to regain control. Adrian stood. Here's my position, gentlemen. My wife will continue writing. I will continue supporting her. And if you attempt to use your political positions to silence her, I will make it my life's work to expose every scandal, every affair, every dirty secret in your carefully managed lives. We can destroy each other, or we can have an honest conversation about reform. Your choice. He walked out before they could respond. His hands didn't start shaking until he reached the carriage. Alara was waiting in the study when he returned. Well, I may have just ended my political career. What did you do? He told her. Every word, every threat. When he finished, Alara was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You're insane, she said finally. Probably. You just made enemies of the most powerful men in England. They were already enemies. Now they know I'm willing to fight dirty. She crossed to him, grabbed his face, and kissed him hard. You're an idiot, and I love you. The feelings are mutual. What happens now? Now? Now they try to destroy us, publicly and thoroughly. And we fight back. And we fight back. They didn't have to wait long. The scandal sheets exploded the next morning. Every paper carried some variation of the same story. Duke Blackthorne defies Parliament, threatens committee members, demonstrates complete lack of control over radical wife. But that was just the opening salvo. By afternoon, whispers had started about Alara's pregnancy. Someone had talked, a servant probably, or a nosy shopkeeper. The news spread like wildfire, each retelling adding new layers of scandal. She'd trapped him with a pregnancy. The child wasn't his. She'd been pregnant before the wedding. The rumors were vicious, contradictory, and completely unstoppable. Adrian wanted to issue a statement. Alara refused. It'll only confirm there's something to deny, she said. Let them talk. Eventually they'll get bored. And if they don't, then we deal with it. But dealing with it became harder each day. Anonymous letters arrived by the dozen. Threats, accusations, obscene suggestions about what should be done to Alara to put her in her place. Someone threw a rock through their drawing room window with a note attached. Whores and traitors. Alara found it, read it, threw it in the fire. We should leave London, Adrian said. Go to the country estate, somewhere safe. Running won't help. Staying here while lunatics throw rocks through our windows won't help either. Yes, it will. Because if we run, they win. They get to say they drove us out, that they silenced the dangerous Duchess and her weak husband. She turned to him. I won't give them that satisfaction. Then what do you suggest? We escalate. Adrian blinked. Escalate? They want a scandal? Let's give them one, a real one, something they can't ignore or dismiss. What are you planning? Her smile was sharp enough to cut. I'm going to testify before Parliament. That's impossible. Women aren't allowed. Exactly. Which is why I'm going to demand they make an exception, publicly, in front of every newspaper in London. They'll refuse. I know. And when they do, everyone will see exactly how afraid they are, how desperate, how the men who claim to value truth and debate won't even let a woman speak in her own defense. Adrian stared at her. The plan was bold, reckless, absolutely brilliant. It could backfire spectacularly, he said. I know. They could arrest you for contempt. Let them try. Elara. She gripped his hands. Adrian, we've come this far. We can't stop now. Not when we're finally making them uncomfortable enough to fight back. I don't want you hurt. I'm already hurt. We both are. But we're still standing, still fighting, and I intend to keep fighting until something actually changes. Looking at her, fierce and pregnant and absolutely unbreakable, Adrian felt something settle in his chest. Not peace exactly, but certainty. All right, he said. Let's do it. They spent 2 days preparing. Elara drafted her statement with surgical precision. Adrian contacted every journalist he knew, promising them the story of the decade. The announcement went out on a Thursday. The Duchess of Blackthorn formally requests permission to address the parliamentary committee investigating seditious publications, to defend her work and answer all charges directly. The response was immediate and explosive. Half the city called it outrageous. The other half called it genius. The committee had 3 options: grant the request and look reasonable, deny it and look cowardly, or ignore it and look weak. They chose option 2. The formal denial arrived Friday morning. Parliament does not recognize the right of women to address committees, regardless of circumstance. Perfect. Elara released the denial to every newspaper simultaneously, along with a brief statement. Apparently the truth is so dangerous that Parliament cannot risk hearing it from a woman's mouth. London went insane. Suffragists rallied outside Parliament. Conservative groups counter-protested. Fights broke out. Arrests were made. One particularly dramatic confrontation resulted in Lady Pembroke being doused with ink by an angry writer. Through it all, Elara remained calm, visible. She attended a women's lecture series, published another essay, gave an interview to a radical newspaper. She was everywhere, unavoidable, forcing the city to confront her. And Adrian was beside her for all of it, until the night someone tried to kill her. It happened after a suffrage meeting in Bloomsbury. They were walking to their carriage, Adrian's arm around Elara's waist, when a figure emerged from the shadows. Adrian saw the knife flash, saw the man lunge. He pushed Elara aside and took the blade meant for her. It caught him high on the left arm, slicing through coat and shirt and skin. Pain exploded white-hot and immediate. The attacker ran. Someone screamed. Elara was shouting his name, hands pressing against the wound, blood everywhere. Adrian! Adrian, stay with me. Look at me. He focused on her face, pale, terrified, beautiful. I'm all right, he managed. You're bleeding. Flesh wound, probably. You idiot, you absolute idiot. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she applied pressure. A crowd had gathered. Someone had run for a doctor. Hands were helping them to the carriage. The ride home was a blur of pain and Elara's voice, constant and desperate, talking to keep him conscious. The doctor arrived within the hour. Stitched the wound, declared him lucky. The knife had missed anything vital. When it was over, Adrian lay in bed, bandaged and exhausted, and found Elara sitting beside him, still pale, still shaking. You could have died, she whispered, but I didn't. You jumped in front of a knife for me. Of course I did. Why? He reached for her hand with his good arm. Because I love you. Because you're carrying our child. Because I made a promise to stand with you, and I meant it. This is my fault. All of this. The attacks, the threats, someone trying to... Stop. He pulled her down until her head rested against his chest. None of this is your fault. You didn't create this system. You're just brave enough to fight it. Brave or stupid? Both, probably. She laughed wetly. We should stop, retreat, before someone actually succeeds in killing one of us. Is that what you want? A long silence, then, no. Me neither. They lay together in the darkness, his blood drying on her dress, and made a silent decision. They wouldn't stop. They couldn't. Too much had been risked. Too much had been said. The only way forward was through. The attack made every newspaper by morning. Attempted assassination of Duke Blackthorne outside suffrage meeting. Assailant unknown. Duchess unharmed. Public opinion, already chaotic, reached a fever pitch. Some blamed Alara for making Adrian a target. Others praised his courage. A few pointed out that attacking a duke and duchess in broad daylight suggested desperation on the part of their enemies. Adrian's wound hurt like hell, but he refused to stay in bed. "We need to respond," he said, gingerly pulling on a shirt. "Show them we're not intimidated. You were stabbed yesterday. Minor detail. Adrian? Alara, if we hide now, they win. They get to say we were scared into submission. I won't give them that." She helped him with his cufflinks, her hands gentle. "What do you propose?" "A party. Here. Tomorrow night. Invite everyone who's still willing to associate with us. Show London that we're not cowering." "No one will come. Then we'll drink alone." "But we're making the gesture." To their surprise, 40 people showed up. Not the old guard. Those bridges were thoroughly burned. But journalists, writers, artists, progressive politicians, suffragists, people who'd been watching from the margins and decided to step into the light. The party wasn't elegant. The wine was decent, but not exceptional. The conversation was intense, political, often argumentative. It was the best night Adrian had spent in years. He watched Alara hold court in the drawing room, debating legal theory with a barrister, discussing publishing strategy with Thomas Ashford, laughing at some joke he couldn't hear. She was radiant, alive in a way he'd never seen her in the sterile perfection of aristocratic gatherings. This was who she was meant to be, not performing for people who valued her only as decoration, but engaged, challenged, respected. "Quite a woman you've got there," a voice said beside him. Adrian turned to find Jonathan Price, a reformist MP he'd known vaguely through parliamentary committees. "She is," Adrian agreed. "You know you're both finished in polite society." "I know. And you're all right with that?" Adrian watched Alara gesture emphatically, making some point that had her debate partner nodding thoughtfully. "More than all right. Good." Price sipped his wine. "Because we could use more people like you. People willing to burn their social standing for something that actually matters." "Are you recruiting me?" "Maybe. There's a group of us, MPs, writers, activists. We're working on actual legislative reform, women's property rights, divorce law, educational access. It's slow, unglamorous work, but it's real." "And you want me involved?" "I want both of you involved. Your wife's essays have done more to shift public opinion in 2 months than we've managed in years, and you've proven you'll stand behind her even when it costs you everything." Price met his eyes. "That's rare. Valuable. We'd be honored to have you." Adrian felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. They weren't alone in this fight. "I'll talk to Alara," he said. "Do. And if you're both interested, we meet Tuesdays, Bloomsbury, small office above a bookshop. Nothing fancy, but we'll be there." After the guests left, Adrian found Alara in the study, organizing papers with the focused intensity she brought to everything. "That went well," he said. "Surprisingly well. I expected maybe a dozen people. We got 40. Turns out there are more allies than we thought." She looked up, a small smile playing at her lips. "Or more people who enjoy watching the aristocracy tear itself apart." That too. He told her about Price's offer. Alara listened, her expression thoughtful. Real legislative work that could actually change things. It would be slow, frustrating, probably unsuccessful more often than not. But it would matter. It would matter. She stood crossing to him. "Adrian, are you sure about this? Really sure? Because once we commit to this path, there's no going back to who we were. I don't want to go back. You'll be an outcast among your own class, mocked, dismissed. Everything you were raised to value, gone. I was raised to value power. Turns out, real power isn't about titles and club memberships. It's about actually changing the world." He pulled her close, careful of his bandaged arm. I choose this. I choose you. I choose fighting for something that actually matters. Alara's eyes were bright. Even if it's hard? Especially if it's hard. She kissed him softly. Then let's do it. Let's burn down their world and build something better. They made love that night with a tenderness that felt like beginning something new, like stepping across a threshold neither of them could uncross. In the morning, Adrian woke to find Alara already dressed, writing at his desk. What are you working on? He asked. She looked up, and the expression on her face made his heart stop. Not fear, not worry, determination. A proposal, she said, for Parliament. A formal bill to reform coverture law. Full legal rights for married women. Control over their own property, their own earnings, their own bodies. They'll never pass it. Not this year. Maybe not for a decade. But we have to start somewhere. She held up the draft. And I'm not asking for permission anymore. I'm demanding change. Adrian crossed the room and looked over her shoulder at the document. It was comprehensive, radical, absolutely perfect. When do we submit it? Next week. I want to refine the language, make it bulletproof. And when they reject it, we submit it again and again, every session, until they're so sick of seeing my name attached to reform bills that they pass one just to shut me up. He laughed. That could take years. Good thing we have time. She pulled him down for a kiss, and Adrian thought about the child growing inside her. The world they were trying to build for that child. The legacy they'd leave. It wouldn't be titles or estates or social position. It would be something better, something earned, something real. But first they had to survive what was coming, because their enemies weren't finished, not by a long shot. The retaliation arrived 5 days later when Adrian least expected it. He was reviewing this property rights proposal in the study when Pemberton appeared, his usually impassive face pale. Your Grace, there are men here from the Lord Chancellor's office. They have a warrant. Adrian stood slowly. A warrant for what? They wouldn't say, but they're demanding to search the house immediately. Alara appeared in the doorway, her expression tight. What's happening? I don't know yet. They went downstairs together to find 3 officials waiting in the foyer, flanked by 2 constables. The lead official, a thin man with calculating eyes, bowed slightly. Your Grace, Duchess, I'm Magistrate Reynolds. I have a warrant to search these premises for evidence of seditious materials. Adrian's blood ran cold. Seditious materials? Written works intended to incite rebellion against the Crown and Parliament. We have reliable information that such materials are being produced in this household. That's absurd. Then you won't mind if we look. Reynolds gestured, and his men began spreading through the house. Alara grabbed Adrian's arm, her fingers digging in. The manuscript, she whispered. For the property bill. It's in my desk. If they find it, they could twist it, call it seditious, use it as evidence to arrest her. Adrian turned to Reynolds. This is a politically motivated harassment. You know it, I know it. What I know is that I have a legal warrant, which means we search with or without your cooperation. Adrian heard crashes from upstairs, books hitting the floor, drawers being yanked open. They were tearing the house apart. Alara's face was white, but her voice was steady. How long will this take? As long as necessary, Duchess. Adrian watched his wife stand there, pregnant and terrified, but refusing to break, and felt rage like he'd never known. This was the price of challenging power. They'd tried threats, violence, social ostracism. Now they were using the law itself as a weapon, and unless Adrian found a way to stop them, they would win. The search lasted 4 hours. When it was over, Reynolds stood in the destroyed library, holding Alara's manuscript for the property rights bill like it was evidence of treason. This will need to come with us, he said. That's private correspondence, Alara protested. It's a document advocating for the overthrow of established legal precedent, which makes it relevant to our investigation. You can't just... We can, and we are. Reynolds looked at her coldly. You should be careful, Duchess. Playing at politics is dangerous for women, especially when they forget their place. Adrian stepped between them. Get out of my house. We're leaving, but we'll be back. Reynolds smiled. Count on it. After they'd gone, Adrian and Alara stood in the wreckage of their home. Books everywhere. Papers scattered. furniture overturned. Alara picked up a torn page from her manuscript, hands shaking. "They took it," she whispered. "Months of work, all my research, gone." Adrian pulled her into his arms. "We'll write it again. They'll just take it again, and again, until we stop fighting. Then we don't stop." She pulled back, and he saw something in her eyes that scared him more than the knife, more than the threats, more than the warrant. Exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been fighting too long with too little support. "What if we can't win?" she asked quietly. And for the first time since this all began, Adrian didn't have an answer. They stood in the ruins of their library, surrounded by torn pages and broken spines, and the silence between them felt heavier than any argument. Alara pulled away first, slowly, like someone testing whether their legs would still hold them. "I need to think," she said. "Alara, alone, please." She walked out and Adrian let her go because he didn't know what else to do. He spent the next hour picking up books, trying to restore some semblance of order. But his hands kept shaking, and eventually he gave up and just sat on the floor among the debris, staring at nothing. They'd lost. Not officially, not yet. But the momentum had shifted. The raids, the theft of Alara's manuscript, the constant attacks. It was working, grinding them down, making the cost of resistance too high, and now Alara was breaking. He could see it, the cracks in her armor, the exhaustion she'd been hiding behind fury and determination. What happened when the fury ran out? Pemberton appeared in the doorway, clearing his throat delicately. "Your Grace, a visitor." "I'm not receiving anyone." "She was quite insistent, sir. A Miss Charlotte Webb." Adrian frowned. The name was vaguely familiar. A journalist, he thought. One of the more radical ones. "Fine, send her in." Charlotte Webb was younger than he'd expected, maybe 25, with ink-stained fingers and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took in the destroyed library without comment. "Your Grace, thank you for seeing me. I'm not sure I had much choice. What do you want?" "To help. If you'll let me." Adrian laughed bitterly. "Help? Everyone who's tried to help us has ended up threatened, ostracized, or worse. I know. I'm counting on it." She pulled a notebook from her bag. "I've been following your wife's work since the first essay. Brilliant stuff. And I've been documenting everything that's happened since. The social attacks, the parliamentary harassment, today's raid." "Why?" "Because someone needs to. The establishment papers won't touch it. They're too invested in maintaining the status quo. But there are other papers, smaller ones. Working-class readership. People who actually care about reform. And you think documenting our destruction will help? I think documenting their tactics will. Your Grace, what happened today wasn't about sedition. It was about intimidation. They're using state power to silence a woman who dared to question their authority." Charlotte leaned forward. "That's a story people need to hear, not just the elite, everyone." Adrian studied her. "What exactly are you proposing?" "An interview. With both you and the Duchess, detailed, honest, everything they've done to you, everything you've lost, everything you're still fighting for." She paused. "It won't be comfortable, but it will be powerful." "And if it makes things worse? Worse than a magistrate stealing your wife's work? Worse than someone trying to stab you?" Charlotte shook her head. "Your Grace, they're already trying to destroy you. The question is whether you'll let them do it quietly or make enough noise that people pay attention." Adrian thought about Alara upstairs, exhausted and questioning whether any of this mattered. Making noise hadn't worked so far, but neither had anything else. "Let me talk to my wife," he said. He found Alara in her chambers, staring out the window at the darkening city. She didn't turn when he entered. "There's a journalist downstairs," Adrian said. "Charlotte Webb. She wants to interview us, document what's been happening." "Why?" "Because she thinks our story matters. That showing people what the establishment is willing to do to silence dissent might actually change minds." Alara laughed without humor. "Another performance. Another gamble." "Maybe. I'm tired of gambling, Adrian. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of waking up every morning wondering what fresh hell they'll inflict today." He crossed to her, standing close but not touching. "Then let's stop." She finally looked at him. What? Let's stop fighting their way. Stop reacting to their attacks. Stop playing defense. He took her hand. Let's go on offense, not with more essays or proposals they can steal, with truth, raw, unfiltered, the kind they can't take from us because it's ours. An interview won't change anything. It might, or it might fail spectacularly, but at least we'd be doing something instead of just surviving. Alara was quiet for a long moment. Then, what would you say? In this interview? The truth. That I was an arrogant bastard who thought marriage was a transaction. That you taught me it could be more. That loving you has cost me everything I thought mattered and given me the only thing that actually does. Her eyes filled with tears. Adrian, and I'd say that I'm terrified. That some nights I wake up convinced I've ruined both our lives. That I don't know if we can win. He cupped her face. But I know we're right. And I know I'd rather fail fighting beside you than succeed pretending you don't exist. The tears spilled over. Alara grabbed his shirt, pulling him close, and they stood there in the fading light, holding each other like drowning people. All right, she whispered. Let's do it. The interview took place 2 days later in their battered study. Charlotte Webb sat across from them, notebook ready, while a photographer set up his equipment in the corner. Before we start, Charlotte said, I want you to understand. This won't be gentle. I'm going to ask hard questions, personal questions, things that will make you uncomfortable. We understand, Alara said. And once this is published, there's no taking it back. Your lives will be exposed, analyzed, criticized. They already are, Adrian pointed out. Fair enough. Charlotte opened her notebook. Let's begin with the wedding night. Your Grace, is it true you left your bride to spend the night with your mistress? Adrian had expected the question. It still felt like a punch. Yes. Why? Because I'd been raised to believe marriage was a legal formality, that love was separate from duty, that a wife was furniture, essentially, decorative and necessary, but not someone you actually engaged with. And now? He looked at Alara. Now I know I was a fool. When did you realize? When she published that first essay. When I understood that the quiet woman I'd dismissed was actually the most dangerous mind in London. Charlotte turned to Alara. Dangerous how? He means I had opinions, Alara said dryly. Unforgivable in a woman. Your essays argue for fundamental legal reform, property rights, divorce access, educational equality. Do you consider yourself a radical? I consider myself a realist. The current system is broken. Saying so shouldn't be radical. It should be obvious. But it threatens powerful people, only because their power depends on keeping women powerless. They fought back, socially, legally, violently. Charlotte's voice softened. How has that affected you? Alara's composure cracked slightly. It's been difficult. We've lost friends, family, social standing. Our home was raided. Our work was stolen. Someone tried to kill my husband. Are you angry? I'm furious, but anger is useful. It keeps you moving when fear tells you to stop. And you, Your Grace, how do you feel about the price you've paid? Adrian considered this carefully. Angry, frustrated, terrified that something will happen to Alara or our child, Charlotte's head snapped up. Child. Too late, Adrian realized what he'd said. Alara's hand found his, squeezing tight. Yes, Alara said quietly. I'm pregnant. 4 months now. Does the public know? There have been rumors. This is the first time we've confirmed it. Charlotte was writing frantically. How does the pregnancy affect your work? It makes it more urgent. I'm not just fighting for myself anymore. I'm fighting for the world my child will inherit. Alara's voice steadied. I want them to grow up in a society where marriage is partnership, where intelligence isn't gendered, where your worth isn't determined by what's between your legs. That's a radical vision. It shouldn't be. The interview continued for hours. Charlotte asked about the parliamentary hearing, the attack, the raid, about their marriage, their strategy, their fears. Adrian had never been so exposed, so vulnerable. It was terrifying. It was also liberating. When it was over, Charlotte closed her notebook. This will publish next week. Front page. I'll make sure of it. What kind of reaction do you expect? Alara asked. Honestly, I have no idea.
Could be massive support, could be massive backlash, could be both. Charlotte stood. But people will read it, and they'll have to decide what they believe. After she left, Adrian and Alara sat in exhausted silence. We just told the entire city I'm pregnant, Alara said. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. No, it's all right. Better they hear it from us than from gossip. She leaned against him. Though I imagine the vitriol will be spectacular. Probably. Worth it? Ask me next week. The article published on Thursday. By Friday, it had been reprinted in a dozen papers. By Saturday, street vendors were selling copies in every borough. The reaction was immediate and split perfectly down class lines. The elite were outraged. How dare the Duchess speak so candidly? How dare she expose her pregnancy publicly? How dare she continue this crusade while carrying a child? But the working classes, they loved it. Adrian hadn't anticipated that. He'd been so focused on his own social circle that he'd forgotten the vast majority of London existed outside it. Letters started arriving. Not threats this time, but support. From factory workers who'd read the essays aloud in their tenements. From shopgirls who passed around worn copies. From women who'd never had their experiences validated before seeing them reflected in Alara's words. Listen to this one, Alara said, reading at breakfast. Dear Duchess, I'm a seamstress in Whitechapel. I've been married 8 years. My husband takes my wages, and I have no legal right to stop him. Your essays made me realize I'm not crazy for thinking that's wrong. Thank you for saying what we've all been thinking. She set down the letter, eyes bright. There are dozens like this. Hundreds, maybe. People we've never met who are fighting the same battles in different ways. Adrian looked at the stack of letters. We're not alone. We never were. We just didn't know it. That afternoon, Jonathan Price arrived with 3 other Reform MPs. We need to talk, Price said without preamble. The interview changed things. How? Public sentiment. It's shifting. Not among your former friends. They're still calling for your heads. But among everyone else? You've become symbols of resistance, of challenging corrupt power. One of the other MPs, a stern woman named Margaret Thorne, leaned forward. We want to introduce your property rights bill, officially, in Parliament. Alara went very still. They stole my manuscript. We know. We also know you're brilliant enough to recreate it from memory, and this time we'll protect it. No more lone crusader. This becomes a collective effort. It'll still fail, Adrian said. You know the votes aren't there. Not yet, but we're working on it. Public pressure matters, and right now you've generated more public pressure than we've seen in decades. Thorne pulled out a list. We have 17 MPs willing to publicly support reform. Not enough to pass anything, but enough to start a real debate. What do you need from us? Alara asked. Keep doing what you're doing, writing, speaking, making noise. We'll handle the legislative mechanics. Price smiled. Think of it as a partnership. You handle public opinion, we handle political strategy. After they left, Adrian poured himself a whiskey with shaking hands. This is actually happening, he said. Don't celebrate yet. 17 votes is nothing. It's 17 more than we had last week. Alara was quiet for a moment, then, Adrian, what if we actually win? What if we change things? Then we've done something that matters. But what comes after? If we succeed, we're still pariahs. Our child will still grow up ostracized. Or our child grows up in a world we help change, where being different isn't a curse. He pulled her close. We can't control everything, but we can control whether we tried. She kissed him softly. When did you become an optimist? When I married a revolutionary. The next breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Lady Hastings, wife of Adrian's former friend, appeared at their door one morning unannounced. Pemberton looked uncertain. Your Grace, Lady Hastings is requesting. Send her in, Alara said. Lady Hastings entered the drawing room like she was walking into battle. Elegant, composed, terrified. Duchess, Your Grace, thank you for seeing me. We weren't sure you'd risk it, Adrian said carefully. Neither was I. She sat, hands folded primly. I read the interview multiple times. And I've been married 23 years. My husband controls everything. My inheritance, my allowances, my social calendar. I have 3 daughters, brilliant girls.
And I've watched society tell them their intelligence doesn't matter, that they exist to marry well and look pretty. Her voice cracked. I've been complicit in that. I've raised them to accept what I accepted. And I'm ashamed. Alara leaned forward. Lady Hastings, I'm not here for absolution. I'm here because I want to help. I have access to the wives of every powerful man in London. Women who've been silent because speaking up meant losing everything. But your interview? It gave them permission to question, to doubt, to wonder if maybe the system isn't natural after all. What are you proposing? Adrian asked. A salon, private, for women only, where we can discuss your work, organize support, plan strategy. She met Alara's eyes. I know I don't deserve your trust. I was horrible to you after the reading, but I'm offering what I have, connections, resources, respectability, if you'll let me use them for something that actually matters. Alara studied her for a long moment. Why now? Why not months ago? Because I was afraid. Because change is terrifying when you've spent your whole life pretending everything is fine. Lady Hastings' voice strengthened. But I have daughters, and I don't want them to spend their lives afraid. Alara glanced at Adrian. He gave a small nod. All right, Alara said. Let's organize a salon. The first meeting happened 2 weeks later in Lady Hastings' drawing room. 20 women attended, wives of dukes and baronets mixing with journalists and activists and working-class organizers. Alara stood before them, visibly pregnant now, and spoke. I'm not here to tell you what to think. You're all intelligent enough to form your own opinions. I'm here to offer you information about coverture law, about property rights, about the legal status of women in this country. She paused. And then I'm here to ask you a question. Are you satisfied with this system? Silence. Then a woman in the back, a duchess Adrian recognized from countless dinner parties, raised her hand. No, I'm not satisfied. My son inherited everything when my husband died. I'm living in what used to be my home at my 20-year-old son's discretion. And it's completely legal. Another voice. My husband beats me, has for years. If I leave, I lose my children. I lose my home. I lose everything. So I stay. I wanted to be a doctor. I had the aptitude, the desire. But medical schools won't admit women, so I married instead. I write. Poetry. My husband publishes it under his name because publishers won't consider work by a woman. One by one, they spoke. Years of frustration pouring out. Experiences Adrian had never considered because he'd never had to. He stood in the corner watching and felt something shift in his understanding. This wasn't about individual bad men. It was about a system that gave men unchecked power and then acted surprised when that power was abused. After the meeting, Lady Hastings pulled him aside. Your wife is extraordinary, she said. I know. My husband is furious that I'm here, threatened to cut off my allowance. Will he? Probably. But I'm tired of living on allowances. Tired of asking permission to exist. She smiled shakily. It's terrifying, but it's also the first time I've felt alive in decades. Adrian understood that feeling perfectly. The salon became weekly. Attendance grew. 30 women, 50, 70. They organized petition drives, fundraising for reform candidates, letter-writing campaigns to MPs, and slowly, inexorably, public opinion began to shift. Not universally. The conservative establishment dug in harder, but among middle and working classes, reform was becoming popular, fashionable even. Parliament noticed. 2 months after the interview, Alara's property rights bill was formally introduced. 17 MPs sponsored it. The debate was scheduled for early March. Adrian attended, sitting in the gallery beside Jonathan Price. The opposition was fierce. Lord Pembroke gave a speech about natural order and divine hierarchy. Others argued about economic disaster and social collapse. But then Margaret Thorne took the floor. Gentlemen, we've heard much today about tradition, about the natural order, about protecting society from change. She paused. But I would ask you this. What are we really protecting? A system that treats half our population as property, that gives husbands absolute power over their wives' bodies, minds, and futures, that tells our daughters their intelligence is decorative. She held up a stack of papers. These are petitions from women across England, thousands of signatures, demanding change, demanding basic legal recognition. These are your constituents, your wives, your daughters. And they're asking, not demanding, asking for the same rights you take for granted. The chamber was silent. This bill won't pass today. We all know that, but it will pass eventually, because truth has a way of winning, even when power fights it. The only question is whether history will remember you as obstacles or allies. She sat down. The vote was called. The bill failed. 142 against, 34 in favor. But those 34 votes were double what they'd hoped for. Adrian found Alara in the corridor afterwards, surrounded by supporters. "We lost," she said. "We got 34 votes. That's incredible. It's not enough." "Not yet, but it's progress." He pulled her close, ignoring the crowd. "A year ago, no one would have even introduced this. Now we've got MPS willing to fight for it publicly. That matters." "Does it? Will it matter to the women who are still trapped, still powerless?" "It matters because it's a beginning, and beginnings lead to endings." That night they held a small gathering at their house. The Reform MPs, the salon organizers, Charlotte Webb, Lady Hastings, and her daughters. They toasted the loss like a victory because, in a way, it was. "To 34 votes," Price said, raising his glass. "To the next session," Thorne added. "To not giving up," Alara said quietly. Everyone drank. Later, after the guests had left, Adrian found Alara in the nursery they'd been slowly preparing. She stood by the window, one hand on her swollen belly. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm thinking about what we're bringing them into. This child. This world we're trying to change." "Having second thoughts?" "No, just scared. That we won't finish what we started. That they'll inherit our fight without the context of why it mattered." Adrian wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Then we write it down. Everything. Why we fought, what we lost, what we gained. We leave them a record. Like a memoir? Like a promise. That we tried. That we cared enough to burn our lives down and build something better from the ashes." Alara leaned back against him. "I love you, you know that?" "I know. I love you too." "Even though I ruined your life?" "You didn't ruin it. You made it mean something." They stood in the quiet nursery, watching London sleep below them, and thought about the future. The fight wasn't over. Not even close. But they were winning, slowly, painfully, one vote at a time, and that was enough. For now, it was enough. For now, it was enough. But for now lasted exactly 3 weeks. The backlash arrived in the form of an editorial in the most conservative paper in London. The Morning Standard ran a full-page piece titled "The Blackthorn Disgrace: How One Couple Threatens the Fabric of Society." It was vicious, personal. It attacked Alara's pregnancy as evidence of manipulation, questioned the child's legitimacy, called Adrian a fool and a traitor to his class. But the most dangerous part came at the end. "We call upon all right-thinking citizens to demonstrate their opposition to this radical agenda. Show the Duke and Duchess that London will not tolerate their assault on tradition and decency." It was barely coded incitement to violence. Adrian read it over breakfast, feeling his blood turn to ice. "This is bad." Alara took the paper from him, scanning it quickly. Her face went pale. "They're calling for a mob." "We need to leave London. Today. Go to the country estate until this." "No. Alara, this is dangerous. Everything we've done has been dangerous. Running now sends a message that they were right, that we were wrong." She set down the paper with trembling hands. "I won't give them that. Not even to protect our child?" The question hung between them. Alara's hand went to her belly, now round and obvious at 7 months. "Especially to protect our child," she said quietly. "Because if we run, what kind of world are we leaving them? One where speaking truth means cowering, where power always wins because good people are too afraid to fight?" Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to throw her over his shoulder and carry her to safety, but he understood what she was saying. This wasn't just about them anymore. "Then we prepare," he said. "We hire security, we fortify the house, A crash from the foyer cut him off. They ran to find Pemberton standing amid shattered glass from the front window. A brick lay on the marble floor, a note tied to it with twine. Adrian unfolded the note. 3 words, "Get out, traitors." "It's starting," Alara whispered. By evening, a crowd had gathered outside their gates. 50 people. 100. More arriving by the hour. They weren't all hostile. Some held signs supporting reform, cheering whenever they glimpsed Alara or Adrian through a window. But others shouted obscenities, threw refuse, demanded the Duke and Duchess show themselves and apologize. Adrian stood at the upstairs window, watching the chaos, and felt fear like he'd never known. "We can still leave," he said. "Out the back," while they're focused on the front gates. "And go where? This will follow us anywhere." Alara stood beside him, watching the mob. "Besides, look closer." Adrian did, and realized that the crowd wasn't uniformly angry. The division was visible, supporters on one side, opposition on the other, with journalists and curious onlookers mixed throughout. "It's not a mob," Alara said. "It's a debate, happening on our doorstep." She was right. He could see arguments breaking out, people gesturing animatedly, signs being raised and countered. "What do we do?" "We go down there." Adrian grabbed her arm. "Absolutely not. You're 7 months pregnant, and half those people want to see us destroyed. Which is exactly why we need to show them we're not afraid." She pulled free. "Adrian, we've spent months writing and speaking and organizing, but we've never actually faced our opponents directly. Not like this, not where everyone can see. This is insane." "Probably. But it's also our chance to take control of the narrative." She was already moving toward the door. "They expect us to hide, to cower. Let's show them something different." Adrian followed, cursing under his breath, because stopping her was impossible and leaving her to face this alone was unthinkable. They walked out the front door together. The crowd saw them and erupted. Cheers from one side, jeers from the other, everyone pushing forward for a better view. Adrian positioned himself slightly in front of Alara, scanning for weapons, for threats, for anyone who might— "Let me speak," Alara said softly. She stepped forward, one hand raised. Slowly, impossibly, the noise died down. "Thank you for coming," she said, loud enough to carry. "I know many of you are angry, confused, perhaps frightened by what my husband and I represent." Someone shouted, "You're destroying the natural order." "Am I? Or am I simply asking questions you find uncomfortable?" Alara's voice remained calm. "I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to ask you to think about whether a system that treats women as property is truly natural, about whether laws that give husbands absolute control over their wives' bodies and futures are truly just." "Women belong in the home," another voice called. "I am in my home, speaking from my own doorstep, using my own mind and voice." Alara placed both hands on her belly. "I'm carrying a child. In a few months, I'll bring them into this world. And when I do, I want them to inherit something better than the legal fiction that they're my husband's property. That seems reasonable to me. Does it seem unreasonable to you?" The hostile section of the crowd was muttering, shifting uncomfortably. A woman pushed forward from the supporters' side, middle-aged, plainly dressed, work-roughened hands. "Your Grace, I'm a seamstress. I read your essays. They changed my life." "How?" Alara asked. "My husband used to take my wages, beat me when I argued. I thought that was just how marriage worked, but you showed me it doesn't have to be, that it's not natural, it's legal, and laws can change." The woman's voice cracked. "I left him, took my daughters. We're poorer now, harder, but we're safe, and my girls know they don't have to accept what I accepted." The crowd was silent now, really silent. Another voice, male this time, angry. "You're encouraging women to abandon their families?" "I'm encouraging women to have choices," Alara replied. "If your marriage requires your wife to have no legal rights, no autonomy, and no escape from abuse, perhaps the problem isn't her choices. Perhaps the problem is the marriage." Adrian watched the crowd's energy shift. Not everyone. Some people were still hostile, still shouting, but others were listening, considering, looking at Alara, visibly pregnant, vulnerable, yet standing there arguing legal theory with a mob, and reconsidering their assumptions. Then Lord Pembroke pushed through the crowd, red-faced and furious. "This is an outrage. You stand here on your own property, inciting rebellion." "I'm discussing legal reform," Alara said. "If you find that threatening, Lord Pembroke, perhaps you should examine why." "You're a disgrace to your sex, and you're a disgrace to humanity, but I'm not asking Parliament to strip your rights because of it." The supporters laughed. Even some of the opposition smiled. Pembroke's face went purple. Your husband should control you. My husband respects me. There's a difference. Adrian stepped forward before Pembroke could respond. Lord Pembroke, you've made your opinions clear, repeatedly. Perhaps it's time to accept that not everyone shares them. The law is on my side, for now, but laws change. They have to, or society stagnates and dies. Adrian addressed the whole crowd now. 100 years ago, we had laws protecting slavery. We changed them. We had laws prohibiting workers from organizing. We changed them. Laws that restricted religious freedom. We changed them too, because we recognized they were unjust. Marriage isn't unjust. Marriage as partnership isn't. Marriage as ownership is. And if you can't see the difference, then you're exactly the kind of man these reforms are designed to protect women from. The crowd erupted again, but this time more voices supported Adrian than opposed him. Pembroke looked around, realizing he was losing the argument, and did what cornered men always do. He lashed out. This is all because he's besotted with her, corrupted by a pretty face, and no, Adrian cut in. This is because she's brilliant, because she sees injustice and refuses to accept it, because she's braver than I've ever been. He took Alara's hand. I support her because she's right, not because I'm corrupted or fooled, but because I finally opened my eyes and saw what's been obvious all along. That half the population has been oppressed for centuries, and calling it tradition doesn't make it acceptable. Lord Pembroke stared at him. You've lost your mind. I found my conscience. There's a difference. Pembroke turned and shoved his way back through the crowd. But he'd lost. They all could see it. The debate continued for another hour. People shouting questions, Alara answering with the same calm precision she brought to everything. Adrian supporting her, clarifying, occasionally arguing with hecklers. And gradually, the hostile portion of the crowd diminished. Some left in disgust. Others stayed but stopped shouting, listening instead. By the time full darkness fell and the crowd began to disperse, something had shifted. They hadn't won everyone. But they'd proven something important. They could face their opposition directly and not be destroyed. That night, lying in bed, Alara was quiet for a long time. What are you thinking? Adrian asked. That I'm terrified. That this is getting more dangerous. That at some point someone will do more than throw bricks. She rolled to face him. But I'm also thinking that woman today, the seamstress, left her husband because of something I wrote. She's safer because I refuse to be silent. That matters to you. It's the only thing that matters. Her hand found his. I'm not doing this for recognition or legacy. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. And if that gets me killed, at least I'll die knowing I tried. Don't talk like that. Why not? It's possible. Likely, even, if we keep pushing. Then we'll face it together. She kissed him softly. Promise me something. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen. Adrian, please. If something happens, promise me you'll keep fighting. For the baby. For the reforms. For everything we started. He wanted to refuse. To tell her nothing would happen, that they'd grow old together watching their children change the world. But she deserved honesty. I promise. Good. She settled against his chest. Now, let's try to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. She had no idea how complicated. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Jonathan Price arrived early, looking simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. You need to see this, he said, spreading newspapers across their breakfast table. Every major paper, conservative and progressive alike, had covered the confrontation outside Blackthorn House. But the coverage wasn't what Adrian expected. Instead of condemning them, the papers were analyzing the debate, quoting Alara's arguments, discussing the legal points she'd raised, the Times. Whatever one thinks of the Duchess of Blackthorn's politics, her willingness to engage critics directly demonstrates a courage rarely seen in public discourse. The Daily Telegraph. The question is no longer whether reform is necessary, but what form it should take. Even the Morning Standard, which had incited the mob, ran a grudging piece acknowledging that the Duchess proved herself a formidable debater. Public opinion is shifting, Price said. Fast. We're getting calls from MPs who wouldn't touch this issue a month ago. They're asking about the next parliamentary session, about how to frame reform bills that might actually pass. Alara set down her teacup carefully. How many votes do you think we could get? For a moderate reform? Property rights for widows, limited divorce access for cases of abuse, maybe 60, 70 if we're lucky. That's still not enough to pass. No. But it's close enough that the opposition is scared. They're organizing, preparing counter-arguments, calling in favors. Price leaned forward, which means we need to organize too, make one final push, and we need to do it before the baby comes. Adrian looked at Alara. She was 7 months along, visibly tired, but her eyes were sharp. What do you suggest? She asked. A speaking tour, not just London, Manchester, Birmingham, Edinburgh. Show the whole country what you showed that crowd yesterday, that you're reasonable, articulate, and right. I'm 7 months pregnant. I know. Which is why images of you arguing legal theory while visibly carrying a child will be powerful. You're not some radical spinster. You're a wife, a mother-to-be, someone the average woman can relate to. Alara looked at Adrian. What do you think? He wanted to say no. Wanted to wrap her in cotton wool until the baby came safely. But he also knew she'd never forgive him for protecting her from something she chose. I think it's your decision, he said. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. You're not my property, Alara. You're my partner. If you want to do this, I'll support you. If you don't, I'll support that too. But I won't make this choice for you. She studied him for a long moment, then turned to Price. Set it up. 6 cities, 2 weeks. We'll make it work. The tour was brutal, not because of hostility, though there was plenty of that, but because traveling while heavily pregnant was exhausting and the schedule was relentless. Manchester. A hall packed with factory workers and their families. Alara spoke for 90 minutes about property rights and economic justice. Half the audience cheered, the other half walked out. But everyone talked about it for days after. Birmingham. A smaller venue, but more intimate. Women brought their daughters to hear Alara speak, asked questions about education and opportunity, left with tears in their eyes and fire in their hearts. Edinburgh. The most hostile reception. Scottish conservatives who saw reform as English interference. Alara argued for an hour with a theologian who cited scripture to justify female submission. She countered every point with legal precedent and logical reasoning. Didn't win him over, but won the audience. By the 6th city, Alara was gray with exhaustion. Adrian begged her to rest, to cancel the remaining events. One more, she said. Just one more. Liverpool. Then we go home. Liverpool was different. The venue was a converted warehouse near the docks. 2,000 people crammed inside. Dock workers, sailors, shopkeepers, factory hands. People who lived hard lives and had little patience for aristocratic abstractions. Alara stood on a makeshift stage, visibly pregnant, visibly exhausted, and spoke. Not about legal theory or parliamentary procedure. About reality. I know many of you think I'm disconnected from your lives. I'm a duchess. I live in a mansion. I've never worked in a factory or struggled to feed my family. She paused. And you're right. My privilege is real. But oppression doesn't care about class. Wealthy women lose their property to husbands just like poor women do. Noble women get beaten just like working women do. The law treats us all the same, as property, and until that changes, none of us are free. A woman in the front row stood. Easy for you to say. You've got money and title. What do you really risk? Everything, Alara said. My social standing, my family relationships, my safety. Someone tried to kill my husband for supporting me. Our home was raided, our work stolen. We've been threatened, ostracized, attacked. Her voice cracked. And I'm terrified, every day, that something will happen to this baby, that we'll fail, that all the sacrifice will mean nothing. Then why keep going? Because I have a choice. And millions of women don't. I can speak without losing my job because I don't have one. I can argue with powerful men because my husband supports me. I can take risks because I have resources. She placed both hands on her belly. My privilege isn't a reason to stay silent. It's a reason to fight. Because I can survive the consequences in ways that women without my advantages can't. The warehouse was silent. Then the woman who'd asked the question started clapping. Others joined. Slowly at first, then building to a roar. Adrian, watching from the side of the stage, felt tears on his face. She'd done it. Not with perfect rhetoric or careful strategy, with raw honesty, with vulnerability, with truth. After the Liverpool event,
they returned to London. Alara collapsed the moment they entered Blackthorn House, exhausted beyond measure.
Adrian carried her to bed, called for a doctor, and refused to leave her side. "The baby?" he asked when the doctor finished examining her. "Healthy, but the Duchess needs complete rest. No travel, no public events, no stress." "You hear that?" Adrian said to Alara. "I heard. 2 weeks. Then the parliamentary session." "No, you're not going anywhere near Parliament until after the baby. The vote is in 3 weeks, Adrian. I need to be there. You need to be alive. I need to matter. I need to know that everything we've done led to something." They stared at each other, both furious, both terrified. "I can't lose you," Adrian said quietly. "You won't." "You don't know that." "No. But I know that if I spend the rest of my life safe and silent, I'll lose myself. And that's worse than any physical danger." Adrian wanted to argue, couldn't, because he understood. Safety wasn't living. It was just not dying. And Alara had never settled for just not dying. The parliamentary session was scheduled for March 15th. The property rights bill, revised, refined, and sponsored by 43 MPs, would be debated and voted on. The week before, Alara went into labor. Too early. 8 months instead of 9. The midwife looked worried. Adrian paced outside the bedroom, listening to Alara scream, and prayed to anything that would listen. Hours passed. Then more hours. Finally, a baby's cry. Adrian burst through the door to find Alara pale and exhausted, holding a tiny red-faced infant. "A daughter," the midwife said. Adrian crossed to the bed, looking down at his child. So small, so fragile, so absolutely perfect. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's early, underweight. We need to be careful." "She's a fighter," Alara said firmly, "like her mother." The baby, they named her Charlotte, after the journalist who'd first told their story, was tiny but healthy. She ate, she cried. She slept in fits and starts. And Alara recovered with terrifying speed, determined to attend the parliamentary vote. "You just gave birth," Adrian protested. 10 days ago. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're bleeding and exhausted and I'm going to Parliament. You can come with me or stay home, but I'm going." Adrian looked at their daughter, sleeping in her cradle, and then at Alara, dressed and ready to fight. He'd never been more terrified, or more proud. "We'll all go," he said, "as a family." The parliamentary gallery was packed when they arrived. Alara carried Charlotte, wrapped in blankets, while Adrian cleared a path through the crowd. They took their seats just as the debate began. The opposition argued for tradition, for natural order, for the sanctity of marriage as currently defined. The reformers countered with statistics, legal precedent, international comparisons, back and forth, for hours. Finally, Margaret Thorne stood for the closing argument. "Gentlemen, we've heard much today about protecting women, about preserving the family, about maintaining society." She paused. "But I would remind you that in this very gallery sits the Duchess of Blackthorn, holding her 10-day-old daughter, having risked her life, her reputation, and her standing to advocate for basic human rights." Every head turned. Alara stood slowly, Charlotte in her arms. The chamber went silent. "She's not here to threaten anyone," Thorne continued. "She's here to witness whether this parliament has the courage to acknowledge that women are people, with minds, with rights, with voices that deserve to be heard." Thorne sat down. The vote was called. Adrian gripped Alara's hand as the count proceeded. For the bill, 78 votes. Against, 64. The chamber erupted. The bill had passed. Not by much, not universally. But it had passed. Alara was crying, clutching Charlotte, laughing and sobbing at once. Adrian pulled them both close, his own face wet. They'd done it. Actually done it. Changed the law. The celebration was chaotic. Reformers cheering, conservatives storming out, journalists scrambling for statements. But Adrian and Alara just held each other and their daughter in the gallery, watching history happen below them. "We won," Alara whispered. "You won." "No, we won. Together." She was right. This had never been about one person. It had been about partnership, about choosing each other, even when it was hard, about building something that mattered more than comfort or status, about love. Real, messy, imperfect love, the kind that changed the world. 6 months later, Adrian sat in their library, rebuilt and reorganized, watching Alara work at her desk. Charlotte slept in a cradle nearby, growing bigger and stronger each day. The property rights bill was law now. Women across England were discovering they could own property, earn wages, leave abusive marriages. It wasn't perfect, wasn't complete. There were loopholes and limitations. But it was a beginning. And Alara was already working on the next fight: education access, voting rights, employment protections. She'd never stop fighting. Adrian wouldn't want her to. "What are you thinking about?" she asked without looking up. "Our wedding night." She set down her pen. "Why?" "Because I was such a fool. I thought marriage was a transaction, a convenience. I had no idea it could be this. Chaotic, terrifying, exhausting, meaningful, real, worth burning down my entire life for." Alara crossed to him, settling in his lap. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" "Not even a little. You?" "Only that I waited so long to put you in your place." He laughed. "You did that on night 1, actually. I was just too arrogant to notice." "True?" They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter sleep. "Adrian?" "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For choosing me. For standing beside me when it would have been easier to walk away." He kissed her softly. "Thank you for making me into someone worth standing beside." Charlotte stirred, making small sounds. Alara went to her, lifting the baby with practiced ease. Adrian watched his wife and daughter, these two people who'd transformed his life, and felt something he'd never expected. Complete. Not because he had everything, but because he had the only things that mattered: love, purpose, partnership. A marriage built on challenge and respect instead of convenience. A legacy of change instead of stagnation. And a daughter who would grow up in a world that was fractionally better because her mother refused to accept the one she'd been born into. That evening, they received an invitation. The Queen herself requested an audience with the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn. "This can't be good," Adrian said, reading the summons. "Probably not, but we're going anyway." The palace audience was formal, intimidating. Adrian and Alara were led through gilt corridors to a private chamber where the Queen sat, looking ancient and formidable. "Your Majesties," Adrian and Alara said together, bowing and curtsying. "Sit," the Queen commanded. They obeyed. The Queen studied them for a long moment. "You've caused quite a disturbance." "We've advocated for reform, Your Majesty," Alara said carefully. "You've challenged the entire social order." "Parts of it, yes." "And succeeded, against considerable opposition." "Not without cost." "No, I imagine not." The Queen leaned forward. "I did not support your bill. I think it premature, potentially dangerous, disruptive to centuries of tradition." Adrian's heart sank. "However," the Queen continued, "I have daughters, granddaughters, and I've watched them struggle against limitations that serve no purpose except to maintain male authority. So while I didn't support your bill publicly, She paused. "I didn't oppose it either." Alara's eyes widened. "Your Majesty." "Don't misunderstand. I still think you're reckless, inflammatory, too radical by half." The Queen's expression softened slightly. "But you're also right, about many things, and I respect courage, even when I disagree with the cause." She stood, and they scrambled to their feet. "Continue your work, Duchess, carefully, but continue it. England needs voices like yours, even when they're uncomfortable to hear." It was as close to approval as they'd ever get, and it was enough. Years later, after more battles fought and won, more laws changed, more minds opened, Adrian and Alara sat in their garden watching Charlotte play with her younger siblings. 3 children now, each one fierce and curious and taught from birth that their worth wasn't determined by their gender. "Do you ever miss it?" Alara asked. "The old life, before everything changed." Adrian considered this honestly. "I miss the simplicity sometimes, the ease of just existing without fighting. But no, I don't miss who I was. That man was hollow, going through motions, living a life that looked perfect from the outside and felt empty from within. And now? Now I'm tired, frequently frustrated, sometimes scared, but I'm alive, really alive. And I'm married to the most extraordinary person I've ever met. He took her hand. So no regrets. Elara squeezed his fingers.
I love you. I love you too. Charlotte ran up, grass-stained and grinning. Papa, Mama, come see what we found. They followed their daughter across the lawn, hand in hand, toward whatever adventure she'd discovered. Behind them, the house stood solid. Their home, their fortress, the place where they'd built something impossible. Not a perfect marriage, but a real one, based on challenge and growth and choosing each other every day, even when it was hard.
Especially when it was hard. Because that was what love actually meant. Not convenience or comfort, but partnership. Real, messy, imperfect partnership. The kind that changed everything. And as Adrian watched Elara laugh at whatever Charlotte was showing them, he thought about that first wedding night, when he'd left her alone to pursue something familiar and easy. The biggest mistake of his life. And the beginning of everything that actually mattered. Because she'd taken that abandonment and turned it into revolution. Had taken his arrogance and transformed it into awareness. Had taken a hollow marriage and made it into something extraordinary. Not by being perfect, but by being brave. And that bravery had infected him, changed him, made him into someone capable of standing beside her. Someone worthy of the love they'd built. The story could have ended in disaster, in violence or tragedy or defeat. Instead, it ended here. In a garden, with children playing, with two people who'd burned down their world and built something better from the ashes, with a marriage that started as a transaction and became a partnership, with love that was earned, not assumed, and with the knowledge that they'd changed things, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to matter, enough to make the fight worthwhile, enough to prove that one person or two people standing together could actually shift the foundations of power. That speaking truth mattered, that courage mattered, that love, real love, was the most revolutionary force of all. So they stood in their garden, hands joined, watching their children play, and knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Not as owner and property, not as aristocrat and decoration, but as partners, equals. Two people who'd chosen each other, day after day in the face of everything trying to tear them apart. And that choice, that daily, deliberate choice to stand together, was worth more than any title or fortune. It was worth everything. It was the whole point.